The whole town of Ciénaga del Cobre, Durango, had declared Don Aurelio Montes crazy, and they had declared it without trial and without proof, which is the most common way that towns declare those things. Welcome. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the Good Tales channel and comment from what part of Mexico or from where you're watching us. He was a man of 58, broad-shouldered, with the large hands of someone who has worked the land since he was young and has not stopped, and with a way of walking slowly and of looking at the ground that the people of the town had interpreted as arrogance for years. He lived alone in the hacienda he had inherited from his father, a large property on the outskirts of the town that had the main house in good condition, but the walls fallen in 3 stretches and the garden untended for 4 years, since his wife Remedios had died of a fever that arrived in January and did not leave. After Remedios, Don Aurelio did not speak with anyone in the town who was not strictly necessary. He bought in the market what was needed, paid what he owed, and left. He did not attend the patron saints' festivals. He did not go to Sunday Mass. He did not accept invitations and did not make them. The town interpreted that silence as contempt and the contempt as madness. And so the matter was settled. Don Aurelio, the crazy one, the surly one, the one who thinks he's more than everyone because he has lands and has no manners. What no one ever knew, because no one took the trouble to ask, was that Don Aurelio did not speak because since Remedios' death he had not found a single conversation that did not remind him that she was no longer there to hear it. That October night, the storm arrived before nightfall. One of those storms of the Durango Sierra that does not warn and does not ask permission. Wind first, then a dry cold, then the rain that falls horizontal and beats against the windows as if in a hurry to enter. Don Aurelio was on the hallway of the hacienda with a clay mug of pot coffee when he heard the noise at the gate. He thought it was the wind moving the latch. Then he heard it again, and it was different. It was a hand knocking on wood. He opened. Outside, soaked from head to sandals, with a 4-year-old girl clinging to her skirt and a bundle of clothes in her arms that turned out to be a baby of a few months wrapped in a mended blanket, was a woman he did not recognize immediately because the rain covered her face. "Forgive me," said the woman, and her voice was firm despite the cold in the water. "I'm not looking for charity. Just a roof until the rain stops. Whatever needs to be done in exchange, I'll work it." Don Aurelio looked at her. He looked at the girl. He looked at the bundle that was the baby. "Come in," he said, and he stepped aside. The woman was named Dolores Vega, although since she was a child, everyone called her Lola. And she was 34 years old and had 2 children named Esperanza, the 4-year-old girl with big eyes and a serious way of observing things, and Tomas, the 7-month-old baby who slept with a calm that did not correspond to the chaos of that night. Lola was from Nombre de Dios, a town 40 kilometers to the south, and had arrived in Ciénaga del Cobre 3 weeks earlier, looking for work and a place to live after her husband Ignacio had died, crushed by a beam at the construction site where he worked, leaving her without income, without a home of her own, and with 2 children and a debt to the landlord she did not expect. Those 3 weeks in Ciénaga del Cobre had been what is called a trial, although no one who was living it would call it that. She had found work washing clothes for 2 families of the town, enough to eat, but not to pay for the room she rented in the house of Doña Amparo Tellez, a woman of sharp voice and fixed opinions, who had told Lola on the first day that she was accepting her because she needed the money, but that she didn't want problems or children crying after 8 at night. The children cried, not out of bad will, but because they were children, and because the room was cold, and because Tomas was starting to cut his first teeth, and that hurt more at night than during the day. Doña Amparo knocked on the door the previous Tuesday with the face of someone who has already made a decision and only comes to communicate it. That she was very sorry, but that it could not be this way. That by Friday, they had to be out. On Friday, Lola gathered her 2 sacks and the mended blanket where she carried Tomas and went out with Esperanza by the hand to look for something she did not yet know how to find. She walked all afternoon. She asked at 2 houses. They told her no at both. When the storm arrived, she had nowhere to go, and the only lit gate she saw from the road was that of the big hacienda on the outskirts that everyone had told her belonged to the surly man who didn't speak to anyone. She knocked anyway, because her children were wet. Don Aurelio gave them the guest room that had not been used for 4 years but was intact. Bed, blanket, a chair, a basin. Lola put Esperanza and Tomas to bed, tucked them in with the mended blanket that had sewn inside it, in a corner with red thread. The name of her mother, Candida. Then she went to the kitchen where Don Aurelio had left the wood stove lit and a plate with pot beans covered with a cloth. She ate standing up next to the stove because she did not want to take advantage of more than what she had already been given. "Sit down," said Don Aurelio from the doorway, without entering. Lola sat down. The next morning, Lola got up before dawn, found the griddle, found the masa that was in a covered bowl in the pantry, and prepared tortillas. When Don Aurelio came out to the hallway, he found the coffee made and the tortillas stacked on a folded cloth, and Esperanza sitting on the patio step, watching the hens with that seriousness of children who observe the world as if it were an important matter. Don Aurelio stood in the doorway a moment, looking at the patio and the girl and the coffee. Then he sat down and drank the coffee without saying anything. That was the beginning. In the following days, Lola did not wait for permission or instructions. She cleaned what she found dirty. She arranged what she found messy. She found the old recipe book of the late Remedios in a kitchen drawer, a notebook with brown covers in the slanted handwriting of someone who cooked with precision and with pleasure. And she began to prepare what was noted there, because the ingredients were there, and because a kitchen with good ingredients and no one using them is a concrete sadness. The first time she made the beef broth from recipe number 12, Don Aurelio stood in the kitchen doorway with the gesture of someone who has just heard something he did not expect. He did not say anything. But that afternoon, while Esperanza ran behind the hens in the patio, and Tomas slept on the mended blanket spread out over the sleeping mat, Don Aurelio took 2 chairs out to the hallway and offered one to Lola without saying it was for her, placing it where she could take it if she wanted. Lola took it. They both sat watching the Durango sunset, that orange color the sky of the Sierra has when the sun goes down slowly. And Don Aurelio said, looking ahead, "My wife used to make that broth on Sundays." "She was a good cook," answered Lola, without turning to look at him. "She was good at everything," he said, and didn't add more. But something on the hallway changed in that moment. In the quiet way things change that don't need words to move. The days became a week, and the week became 2. Lola continued washing clothes for the families of the town, carrying Tomas in the mended blanket tied to her back and leading Esperanza by the hand. The town observed her with that particular attention small towns have for what they don't understand. That the new woman was living at the surly man's hacienda. That the surly man had opened the gate. That in the mornings, smoke could be seen in the chimney of the hacienda's kitchen, which meant that someone was cooking, which meant that something had changed in there. The gossip began softly and got harder over time, which is how gossip always begins. That the woman was an opportunist. That Don Aurelio had gone even crazier. That the children were not by any known father. Doña Amparo Teles, who was the same one who had kicked Lola out of her room on the night of the storm, was the one who spoke the most and with the most detail, which is what those with the most guilt in the matter tend to do. What none of the voices of the town knew yet was that a man named Licenciado Fuentes, notary of the neighboring municipality, had been trying for 2 years to convince Don Aurelio to sign a document that transferred ownership of a stretch of his lands to a buyer. The Licenciado did not name, but who paid well. Don Aurelio had refused twice. The Licenciado had come back a third time that week, with new papers and new arguments and the same smile that men who work for someone more powerful than themselves have and prefer not to let show. But Don Aurelio did not know that Lola, while cleaning the workroom where he kept his papers, had found at the bottom of a drawer a sealed letter that bore the letterhead of the same notary's office of Licenciado Fuentes, dated 18 months earlier, where what those lands contained was detailed with precision. An underground spring of water that studies by an engineer hired in secret had confirmed as a source of considerable value. The letter was not for Don Aurelio. It was a copy of an internal communication that someone had put in the wrong drawer or had dropped without meaning to. Lola read it. She folded it. She put it back where it was. And that afternoon, when Don Aurelio came in from the field, she put 2 cups of coffee on the table on the hallway and said, "There is something you need to see." Don Aurelio read the letter. He read it twice. Then he put it on the table with a calm that seemed to Lola more dangerous than anger. "Where did you find it?" "In the drawer at the bottom, under the records of last year's harvest." Don Aurelio nodded slowly. "How long has it been there?" "I don't know. But the ink isn't faded. It's not old." That same week, Don Aurelio went to the municipality with the letter and with his own lawyer, a man with the surname Gutierrez, who lived in Durango and who took 2 days to confirm what the letter said: that the spring was within the boundaries of the hacienda, that the property was legitimate and registered, and that Licenciado Fuentes had been acting on behalf of a buyer who intended to obtain the rights for a fraction of the real value. Licenciado Fuentes did not return to Ciénaga del Cobre. The buyer was also not named publicly, but the town learned that there had been an attempt and that Don Aurelio had stopped it. And that information traveled from mouth to mouth with the speed that news has when it implies that someone important was about to lose something important. Licenciado Fuentes arrived at the hacienda on a Thursday afternoon with his assistant and with the face of a man who comes to contain damage. Don Aurelio received him on the hallway. Lola was inside with the children, but she heard everything. "Don Aurelio," said the Licenciado, with that voice of someone trying to sound reasonable, "this can be resolved without complications. My client offers to compensate the misunderstanding with a sum that you will find fair." Don Aurelio looked at him from his hallway chair with his arms on his knees and a stillness that was not that of a calm man, but of a man who has already decided. "There is no misunderstanding," he said. "There is a documented attempt at fraud, and the document has been registered at the municipality since this morning." The assistant stopped writing in his notebook. "My lands are not for sale," continued Don Aurelio. "The water that is on my lands isn't either. And if you come back here without an appointment and without your own lawyer, the next one who receives you is the judge." Licenciado Fuentes opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the assistant. The assistant gathered his notebook. They left down the dirt road without looking back. From the garden, Esperanza saw them leave and then ran into where her mother was. "The men already left," she said. "I know," answered Lola. "Were they bad?" Lola thought a moment. "They were careless," she said, "which is sometimes worse." Don Aurelio came into the hallway and found Lola with Tomas in her arms and the mended blanket over her shoulder and the key to the hacienda, the large brass key that hung on a nail next to the door, which Lola had taken that morning to open up because he had gone out early. She held it out without saying anything, because it was his key and it was his house, and she didn't want him to think she took what was not hers. Don Aurelio looked at the key. He looked at Lola. He looked at Tomas, who was watching him with those baby eyes that still don't know how to pretend. "Keep it," he said. Lola did not respond immediately. She closed her fingers over the key slowly. "Only if I'm allowed to earn it," she said. "You already earned it," answered Don Aurelio, and went back inside. When the following spring came, the garden of the hacienda was planted for the first time in 4 years. Esperanza was now 5 and had learned to collect the eggs from the hens without scaring them, which was an art that required patience and that she had developed with admirable seriousness. Tomas walked holding onto chairs and the knees of whoever was close by, and Don Aurelio had carried him 3 times without anyone asking him to, which for a man who didn't speak with anyone was a considerable transformation. On the wall of the hallway, Lola had hung the mended blanket with her mother's name sewn inside. Not as decoration, but as what it was, a mark of origin, a memory of who had made it and for what. Next to the blanket was Remedios's recipe book on a wooden shelf that Don Aurelio himself had built one Sunday without saying it was for that, and the brass key hanging on its nail, no longer next to the main door, but on the hallway where it could be seen. One morning, while the 4 of them were having breakfast at the hallway table with the pot coffee and the freshly made tortillas and the Durango sun warming the stones of the patio, Don Aurelio said, without lifting his gaze from the mug, "This place felt empty." "Not anymore," said Lola. "Not anymore," he confirmed. Sometimes the true home is not the place where you were born or the place you thought you were going to have, but the one someone opens for you on the night of the storm, when you had no more doors left, and where little by little, without anyone announcing it, you begin to leave your things on the nails of the wall, as if they had always been yours. Has an unexpected door ever opened when all the ones you knew had closed? If this story reached your heart, leave your comment below. Tell us from what part of the world you're accompanying us this afternoon. Give us a like, subscribe to the Good Tales channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any story. Share this story with someone who needs to know that there are still doors that open, and that sometimes the hand that opens is not the one one was expecting. Until the next story. And the people of Cienega del Cobre, in time, stopped calling Don Aurelio Montes surly. And when someone new arrived in the town and asked about the big hacienda on the outskirts, the people pointed to it differently, with that quiet respect that is earned slowly and that no one can take away.